I remember the first ever grown-up book I ever read. Do you remember what yours was? I mean, a book without pictures. Okay, there was a picture on the front cover, but no pictures inside. It was one of those thick books. My dad had come home. I must have been about 7 years old, and he pulled this dog-eared book out of his pocket and gave it to me. And it was, I say it was absolutely enthralling. It was a new discovery for me. And the book was by an English author named Enid Blyton. Has anyone ever heard of Enid Blyton? A few people have. Do you know that this was the book? I know it was this one. It was a small group of children who were adventurers. They go and solve mysteries. And she wrote a whole series of these books. She, in fact, authored more than 600 children's books. She sold over 600 million copies. In fact, she is the fourth most translated author in history, with her books being translated into 90 languages. Incredible, huh? Enid Blyton. Well, I love these books. And then after I read dozens of Enid Blyton books, I moved on to the Hardy Boys. Now, in North America, you'd be more familiar with the Hardy Boys, right? And then by the time I hit junior high, I moved up to Agatha Christie novels. You see, I loved mystery novels. I loved the suspense, trying to figure it out, who was the one who was behind it. And I loved the way how at the end it was all tied up with a bow. Everything was made clear. Everything was made known. Mystery. Well, I want to talk this morning about a different type of mystery. And that's mystery as how we understand it in a theological sense from the perspective of our faith. Perhaps when you were young, asking questions of a Sunday school teacher, you were told at some point, well, it's a mystery, which was code for shut up and stop asking difficult questions that I don't know the answer to. But a theological mystery is not that about which we can know nothing, nor is it not that about which we can know everything. It is that about which we can know something. Does that make sense? We can penetrate it, we can enter into it, but ultimately it is incomprehensible to us. But we can enter into it even though we cannot fully penetrate it. Can we bring my mic down a little bit, please? It's too hot. Thank you. The word mystery may have been used by Peter, James, and John today to describe what they experienced on the mountain. In the gospel this weekend, we have the story, as we do every single Lent, the second Sunday of Lent, the story of the Transfiguration, where they have this vision, Jesus before their eyes is transfigured. This heavenly light explodes out of him. His clothes become dazzling white, reminiscent of what is written in the book of Daniel. Jesus is transfigured. They receive a glimpse of the underlying mystery of the divinity of Jesus. Now, they always knew that there was more than meets the eyes. There was more that met the eyes when it came to Jesus because of the things he did, the things he said, the things he said about himself. But for the most part, although he hinted at his divinity, it was hidden. It's not as if Jesus walked around Galilee with, light bursting out of him that dazzled everyone. The divinity of Jesus was hidden in mystery. Throughout his ministry, it was hidden, especially at his birth, and it was incredibly hidden in his death and resurrection. I mean, he died the death of a criminal, of a thief, of a slave. His divinity was hidden. It takes faith. It took faith then, and it does now, to see beyond what the eyes can see. This weekend, we're in the second week of a preaching series called Behold, in which we are exploring the theme of the Eucharist. We're looking to enter more deeply into our understanding of the Mass, or the Eucharist. See, in the Eucharist, we touch mystery, a mystery that is also obscured. Our senses experience only one dimension of what we believe the Eucharist to be. Now, we spoke earlier about transfiguration, how Jesus was transfigured on the mountaintop, but there's a similar word that we use in our theological language to describe what we believe about the Eucharist. Some of you might be familiar with it. It's called transubstantiation. It's a word that came into our vocabulary about 1,000 years ago to describe something, to attempt to describe something that has been believed since the earliest time in the church, that the Eucharist is not just bread. It's not just a symbol. It is a symbol. It's not just a symbol. Jesus is, we say, truly present, physically, metaphysically, not just spiritually, under the sign of bread and wine. And if we could truly catch a glimpse of the underlying mystery, perhaps we too, like Peter, James, and John, would fall on our faces if we had but a glimpse. But this mystery also remains hidden and can only be apprehended by faith, just as Jesus was himself during his earthly ministry. But the mystery of the Eucharist is not only about bread and wine becoming the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus. It also refers to the entire act of worship that is the Mass, especially what happens during the Eucharistic prayer. And I want to focus in on this with you for a few minutes. The Second Vatican Council, which was a huge gathering of bishops from all over the world in the 1960s that really changed the direction of the church and prepared it to enter into modernity and postmodernity perhaps, said this, that the Eucharist is the source and the summit of the Christian life. Think about that for a second. That's quite a claim. It's the source and the summit of the Christian life, the Eucharist. And when they said this in the document Lumen Gentium, it's one of the 16 Vatican II documents, when they said this, they weren't referring to the consecrated bread and wine. They meant the act of worship, what we do, what we're going to do in a few minutes, that this experience is the source and summit of the Christian life. How could they say a thing like that? Well, very quickly, the Eucharist itself is, and I'm going to explain this try to explain it in a second, is what we call the Paschal mystery. Now, that's another fancy term. You notice the M word, mystery, but Paschal means Passover. It's the Passover mystery. It's what we will celebrate in Holy Week, on Holy Thursday, Good Friday, and Holy Saturday. The Last Supper, the death of Jesus, and the resurrection. All of these things are contained, in a sense, within the Eucharist. And that's why it's the source and summit of the Christian life. In fact, we can speak about the Eucharist. Please don't be distracted by the screens. We've got a malfunctioning part that we're waiting to be replaced. So the Eucharist is, we can talk about it as a meal, as a memorial and sacrifice. And if you listen carefully to the words of the prayers, the Eucharistic prayer, you'll see these words. You see references to the Eucharist being a meal, the supper, the banquet. You'll hear multiple mentions of the Eucharist as a sacrifice. And we say, do this in memory of me. It's a memorial. It's all of these things together. You know, traditionally, we used to focus on only one aspect of this, the idea of the Eucharist as sacrifice. We used to refer to Mass as what? Remember, the holy sacrifice of the Mass. And then we got into the 70s, and the focus was on the meal, right? But let me ask you a question. That stone thing over there, what is that? Is it an altar or is it a table? It's both. In Catholicism, the answer is usually both. It's both and. It's both. It is an altar. It's an altar of sacrifice, but it's a table around which we gather to share a covenant meal, to literally eat the new Lamb of God who is Jesus himself. And we do so in the context of memorial. Now, I want to explore this understanding of memorial with you. You see, in the Jewish understanding of memorial, this wasn't just mere recollection. The Jewish liturgical act of memorial, and by the way, St. Luke, when he tells the story of the Last Supper, has Jesus used technical liturgical language? Do this as my memorial, Jesus says. And when the Jewish people celebrated a liturgical memorial, it was like you were transported through time and space, almost like getting into a time machine, and you entered into that actual event. So when we celebrate the memorial of the Eucharist, we're transported into the upper room. We're brought literally to the foot of the cross. We're not, when you talk about sacrifice, we're not re-sacrificing Jesus. Jesus was sacrificed once for all. The letter to the Hebrews is clear about this. But we are brought literally to the foot of the cross. We are brought to the tomb. And we touch the mystery. Over the years, I've been blessed to travel to the Holy Land 5 times. I've led pilgrimages, and who knows, maybe sometime in the future when the world calms down, we can have a parish pilgrimage. But one of the highlights of the pilgrimage was to go to this church in Jerusalem, which is really the center of pilgrimages to Jerusalem, is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And it is built over the site which from the earliest centuries was believed to be the site where Jesus was crucified and was buried, because the gospel tells us that the tomb was nearby. And this church building encompasses both locations. And pilgrims of all nations and all Christian backgrounds enter into this church to pray. And I remember the first time I went there, I went to what is believed, and historians say that this is pretty certain, to be the rock of Calvary. And I remember touching that rock, and it was a very powerful experience, but you know something? It was very familiar to me. Because I realized then that every time I celebrate Mass, every time we celebrate Mass, we touch the event that makes that rock holy. Brothers and sisters, when we celebrate the Eucharist, it's ours to touch. We stand not only before mystery, but are invited into its midst to touch the cross. And when we touch the cross, we bring all of our pain to the cross, our brokenness, our grief, our sins, for healing and redemption. In the Eucharist, we stand not only at the tomb, but within the tomb, to so experience the new life of Jesus, risen from the dead, to so experience it that we can actually taste it, literally, in the Eucharist. Now, next week, I'm going to look with you about how we can enter more fully, consciously, and actively into the worship of the Eucharist. That's next week. But for today, this morning, let us reach out to the Lord. Let's reach out with our minds, with our hearts, and with our hands to touch the mystery that is before us. For the more we enter into the transformative mystery of the Eucharist, the more that mystery will enter into us.